Hello, I'm Michael Verney and welcome along to the Indo GAA podcast with thanks to AIB. AIB is at the heart of Gaelic games across both club and county, and in 2025 they're celebrating a decade of sponsoring the All-Ireland Senior Football Championships. With this year's championship shaping up to be one of the most competitive in years, AIB is more excited than ever to bring fans closer to the action. Check out the hashtag #TheToughest for more. Hello and welcome to the Indo GAA football show. I'm delighted to be joined by Dick Clerkin, who has a very exotic Mediterranean background there with palm trees. Pat's background is not quite as exotic, but there are some beautiful flowers in the background. And Pat and all his Kerry brethren have come out of the long grass. By God, Pat, he sucked us all in, he lured us all in, and he delivered one of the most scintillating 15 or 20 minutes of football that we've seen in Croke Park in quite some time. Talk me through it, Pat. What a period of play that was. Unbelievable stuff from the Kingdom.
You know, there was two things I said about Kerry last weekend that I said, didn't know the absence of not playing Division 1 teams. How would that be? Was it a good move, bad move? Would playing Division 1 teams take a lot out of them? Would they come in after playing Division 2, Division 3 teams? Would they come in undercooked? So last year, after playing outside Division 1, after playing poor teams in the qualifiers, they were undercooked when they came up against Derry in the quarterfinal, and they fell over the line. This year, two question marks always over them. One, would they be undercooked? No. That was number one. And number two, obviously the big question mark was about injuries then. And I've still looked at the list, and 7 of the starting 15, of the best 15, were actually missing last Sunday. Yeah. 7. So, you can understand, undercooked, 7 injuries. You can understand why people were pessimistic. And there's no point in saying after we proved you wrong and whatever like that. The evidence was there that things are. Even though I did give 7 pieces of evidence last week that reasons why Kerry could beat Armagh. But there was a lot of ifs, buts and maybes. We were looking, was there that big performance in the man? Jesus, there was. And I was looking back over the years, in my opinion, right, that 15 minutes was the best 15 minutes of football I've seen for many, many a long day. That performance last Sunday, even the first half and all of the second half, I felt that was the best performance that this team has given under Jack O'Connor. That's a fair point. I think I'm looking back over the years and I'm looking at when last did Kerry produced brilliant performances. And I looked at 2 All-Ireland winning teams in that. You had 22 against Galway and you had 14 against Donegal. And to be quite honest, they were good performances, but they stumbled over the line. They weren't great performances. Donegal could have beaten them. Galway could have beaten them as well. And I go back and I'm trying to figure out when was the last similar result that came from nowhere. And it was 2009.
Yeah.
And you can remember in 2009, and I remember it well, the qualifiers, they stumbled past Longford. Sligo had a penalty to beat them and missed the penalty. Stumbled over Sligo and stumbled over Antrim. And then they reached the quarter-final and you something similar. You said, geez, I think the evidence is they're gone. And yet then they play Dublin in the quarter-final and they produced what I believe was the last brilliant performance when they beat Pat Gilroy's Dubs by 17 points. And I read the comments of Jack after the game. Now, bear in mind, that's 16 years ago. And I swear to God, I could copy and paste because the same comments he mentioned post-match in 2009 are the same comments from last week, proving everyone wrong and do. So that was 2009. Right, so there was a guideline. I then looked at 2012 just for a bit of perspective. And Kerry people have been really celebrating, and rightly so, last Sunday's performance. But with all due respects, and it was a brilliant performance and well-deserved, it was an All-Ireland quarter-final. Jesus, there's no medals or trophies handed out for winning quarter-finals or for brilliant performances. The last qualifier performance that I saw where Kerry celebrated with exuberance was in 2012.
Tyrone.
When 28,000 people packed into Killarney on a lovely hot Saturday afternoon and Kerry destroyed Tyrone. And they celebrated with gusto. Absolutely magic. And we're back. And again, I looked at the comments and guess what? We proved the critics wrong and the people at Kerry were writing us off. And the warning here is that what happened in the next match in 2012?
Yeah.
We were beaten by Dublin in the quarter-final. So a brilliant performance, but let's put things into perspective. It's only a quarter-final victory.
Just on that, Dick, obviously some of the narrative in, our compatriot in the Sunday Independent, Joe Brolly, was saying that Kerry were only a one-man team and Clifford was the only forward of any note. Like, talk about a man having the bit between his teeth. Clifford was brilliant, but Sean O'Shea was front foot. He looked like he was a man on a mission. He had a point to prove. He was kicking points for sport. I couldn't believe now he was given the latitude that he was given. I thought it was bonkers now, I have to say. But there was so many different players stepped up. Joe O'Connor, brilliant. Lads bombing forward. Micheál Burns, even when he came in. There was lads with points to prove everywhere. We take aside now this thing of the semi-final and whatever and backing it up. Just looking at this game as a game in itself, like, Kerry were just so hungry and so mad to prove a point.
They were, like, but as we always do as pundits, we sort of reverse engineer a narrative after the game to why it was won. But like, I was sitting here watching the game with a few Armagh ones, and when Rian O'Neill kicked that point to put Armagh 5 points ahead, and any man that says otherwise, there was no money that you'd been putting on Kerry at that point in time. And that was 40 minutes into the game. The first half, I thought Kerry, as you said, were reliant on Sean O'Shea to keep them in the game with those big points, but Armagh were the better team. And when Rory Grugan, nipped in and nabbed that goal in, it looked like Armagh were comfortable and hadn't really kicked into gear yet. But that 15 minutes, from 40th minute to 55 plus, it was an outlier. It was so remarkable, to the point that if Jack O'Connor and his team go back, they cannot be reliant on the likes of that to be happening again in a semi-final in All-Ireland, because the way they dominated the kick-out, that just doesn't happen to that level for sustained period, and their shot efficiency. It was just remarkable, to the point that you might never see the likes of that again for a long time. So either side of that, they were, as what we've seen all year, good but not great. The question has to be asked, and Armagh, I think Kieran McGeeney is still in a bit of shock. Like, what actually happened to them? How did they get things so wrong and not to be able to stem that flow? Because as good and all that Kerry were, and the same charge can be put at Monaghan, for that 15-minute period, they were awful, to the point that they, as All-Ireland champions, that they couldn't get their hands on a ball, they couldn't manufacture anything, they couldn't even do what you'd expect from a Northern team. Get a bit of dirt and needle and get a bit of a row going to get something to break momentum. I just couldn't believe it.
Wasn't that mad, Dick, that nothing happened?
I couldn't believe it. That they just sort of sat there and they sat back on their heels. Well, it was confidence or arrogance that they thought, we'll ride this out, but we'll still bounce back, we'll finish strong because we've got a stronger bench and all the rest. And before they knew it, the game was over. It happened that quickly. That 15 minutes, and they never took a breath, and the game was over, and there was nothing they could do to get back. And then Kerry had just got the momentum. He had boys like Michael Burns. Jesus, he had a second half of football there that he might never have again. He was winning kickouts, he was winning breaks, he was kicking points, he was just having a field day. So it was remarkable in that sense. Now, But I would agree with Pat, a warning sign for Kerry. They cannot be reliant on that level of performance that they got in that 15 minutes now to get them an All-Ireland final, because that was such an outlier in terms of dominating an opposition's kickouts, but also their scoring efficiency, and then the other team not laying a hand on you for that period. And you're not going to get that. Certainly you're going to get that against Tyrone, and not to write off Meath, likely Donegal if they get that far in the final.
Yeah. Pat, just a quick one on Armagh.
I'm sorry, I have to show Dick the clipping from the game just to be sure. And you know the way managers love to build up siege mentality. And Jimmy McGuinness is brilliant in that. Now, when Jack,
don't be showing me that. Take that down. Edit this out.
When Jack was reading his Sunday paper on Sunday morning, and believe me, every manager and every player read the Sunday papers. They know what. So Clifford, the only Kerry footballer worthy of name, you can rest assured that was plastered up in the dressing room. These boys were being shown that, and these boys were being told, this is what he thinks. This is what the country thinks of it. This is what your county thinks thinks of it. And the eyes would have been bulging out his head. Look, I know Joe for years. Like, Joe operates on the Oscar Wilde philosophy, that mantra that there's only one thing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about. So as long as Joe's being talked about nicely, or Joe is as happy as Larry with that. He doesn't give a tuppenny. And Joe can do, like I said, and I said it before, Joe can do more flip-flops than you'd find in the RT commercial department. So so that was, like, Kerry were wounded. He built up this siege mentality, and there was no doubt about it. Jack was cranky, like, and when Jack is cranky, Jack is good when he's cranky. A nice Jack is not a normal Jack at all. So Jack was cranky. There's no doubt about it. After the Meath performance, or non-performance, the vultures were starting to circle. And, like, it's almost certain that this is Jack's last year. Win or lose, this is Jack's year as manager. And the manoeuvrings are going on. Subtle and not so subtle manoeuvrings for certain people, and to be put in place or to be thought about as management for last year. So Jack was in his ultimate. So can I just say, Jack, if you're listening, can I just say, Jack, a managerial masterclass from you, and it was. Can I say why? Tactically, that middle third, right? We know that middle third of Kerry were blitzed, were destroyed against Meath. We know that they carried a midfield pairing into the game, which was certainly a poor midfield pairing. But what he did was, selecting Mark O'Shea was a strange one, but what he did was, he put big men in the middle of the field. He put Mark O'Shea there. He put Sean O'Brien there. He had Graham O'Sullivan operating. Joe O'Connor, who was magnificent. So he had big guys. Now, if you look at the stats, the gas part about it is, they didn't win a whole pile of primary possession. But what they did was, they managed to break the ball. They had flooded the middle third with bodies, and they were picking up. And if you told me on Sunday morning, by the way, some of the stars of the game, there'll be 3 Crokes fellas that'll start today. Evan Looney, Mark O'Shea, and Micheál Buttons, and you'd say, oh, you're off your rocker. So that's number one, like a masterclass in terms of tactics and in terms of selection by Jack. Jack, you're listening. I will send down a copy. So secondly, Sean O'Shea. You talked about Sean O'Shea. I've known Sean O'Shea all my life. I meet him 3 or 4 days a week. You talk about Johnny Sexton in rugby or Roy Keane. This is what Sean O'Shea is. He is the most driven individual, most focused individual that I know. He drives standards for himself, but he drives standards for the team. He is, as Jack alluded to last week, he is the spiritual leader. Jesus, he demands. And last Sunday, he produced the game of all games. I know the way, like, Shawnee operates, and Shawnee will have read that article. It would have been sent to Shawnee that there's only Kerry are only one-man team. And Shawnee, there was fire in his eyes, there was anger in his eyes. You knew this was one of those games. So go back to Armagh. Look, there's 2 things about Armagh. First of all, a gunfighter is no good without bullets. And fools die to Gaelic football. If you ain't got the ball, you can't do much about it. For that 15 minutes, Kerry owned the ball. Their shooting stats in that time, they got 14 points. Would you believe it or not? Out of all this, they missed 1 shot. David Clifford had a 2-point effort at drop shot. So that 15 minutes. But, like, was there anything new in that? I looked at my notes from this year, and I looked at the same thing keeps cropping up all the time. And I'd say lack of goals from Armagh. Okay, they're not scoring goals. They haven't been scoring. They got 1 last week, but that was from a Kerry mistake. But the other thing I kept writing down was zonal defence. This way, they protect that, but I said they're vulnerable. And if you go back to the first game against Antrim, guess what? Antrim kicked 5 2-pointers in the first half. Antrim were leading at half-time. Why? Because Armagh were passive in defence, sat deep and didn't come out. And it was the same last Sunday. Kerry have scored 25 2-pointers. 21 of the 25 have come from Shawnee O'Shea and David Clifford. They focused on, they had a sort of low block. They focused on Shawnee, on David Clifford. They had a sort of +1 operating in front of David Clifford. And Shawnee must have thought, Jesus, all his Christmases had come together because he was operating around the arc, the 40 metre, in space with no one marking him. So a very passive, I agree with Dick, a very passive Armagh. Tactically, they got it wrong. Defensively, they most definitely got it wrong. And a deserved performance by Kerry, but like I said, bigger days ahead.
Pat, I'll come back to you in 1 second because you dropped a bit of a bomb there that I want to come back to. But quickly, Dick, that whole siege mentality, that whole emotion element to the game. That will only get you so far. Like, that won't win championships. It might win games and proving a point or whatever. So that's kind of a dangerous thing going into Tyrone as well from a Kerry point of view. What's the, are they going to find another angle? That this was the angle. You know what I mean?
It isn't. It isn't. Like, I've always sort of looked, and I'm not far out of the game. You're trying to, I suppose, look and learn in terms of, well, why do certain teams and counties turn up on big days, and why we talked about this last week, Pat, that Croke Park sometimes makes good players great and other players go into their shell, and it's something to do with the size of the pitch or the stadium. I think a lot of it is to do with the environment and the culture and even the talk around the clubs and the bars and the environment you live in. The reality is, and God rest Pádraic Joyce said it a couple of years ago, that the effing animals in Kerry, that constant drives the best out of Kerry footballers and the best out of Kerry. And that's why they keep turning up. Even if they have a year or two off, they'll keep, because the standards are there, that there's an expectation that, mediocre is not good enough, that you have to be driving that standard. And that plays itself out. Tyrone have that as well. In the same way as Tyrone, keep popping up, and here they are again. Not that long ago, we thought they were sort of done after winning an All-Ireland against the Head, and they're back challenging again, because up there now there's that same expectation, and that if you're not competing for All-Irelands, don't be coming annoying us about anything else, and that's driving them forward. Monaghan don't have that, and sometimes I would love a bit of needling, a bit of people sort of criticising Monaghan players and performances to get your back up, to go and prove somebody wrong, because sometimes counties like Monaghan and others, that they maybe celebrate mediocrity, or they're happy with it, and it allows players to sit into a bit of a comfort zone. So I would say that the Jack O'Connors and the Kerry players, be happy that you have that, because I can say that now with certainty from my playing time, and now as a Monaghan supporters, that sort of angst that he is sort of given out about is the same reason that drove them to the performance that they got. So you can't be sort of talking about setting them out. So it's got them that far, and it'll keep them going, because now they have a fresh story about Tyrone. They don't need any motivation around Tyrone. They'll still be drawn up. Like, I was listening to Tomas O'Shea in a podcast there recently, I think with Joe or yourself, Mike, I can't remember which, the regret that era of Kerry players have about basically, essentially, for all they won, they were the second best team of their time, because Tyrone always had it over them. That Kerry team still should be fresh in the memory, getting turned over a couple of years from Tyrone against the Head in that semi-final. So they should have no shortage of armoury again, because one thing, Mike, that's been consistent over this championship, of all the big games, and you could list, there must be about a dozen games that you'd say went against the Head in terms of an upset. The psychology of the teams going into it, either from the previous game or something that was coming against them that they were written off, or another team was complacent going into it, that had a massive bearing on the performance of the respective teams. And the underdog has been shown, because of the new rules, it gives them an opportunity to really have a cut at the team, and that's what you want. You want something to drive you to be hungry, and teams that are sort of falling by the wayside, or teams that ultimately maybe didn't have that, and it's the teams that had that bit between their teeth are still starting fighting.
Pat, you mentioned
actually
one sec now. You mentioned about manoeuvring in the background in Kerry about who will be Kerry manager in 2026. You cannot throw stuff like that in and not give a bit more substance to it. So can you put a bit of substance to that talk, please?
I can't, but the three blind men of Alabama know that there's a big list, a growing list of fellas who'd like to take over as Kerry manager. So you can talk about Tomas O'Shea, you can talk about possibly Eamon Fitzmaurice returning.
Will Dara be a selector?
You can talk about Kieran Donaghy coming back from Armagh. There's a lot of manoeuvrings, and like I said, subtle and not so subtle. The gas thing about Kerry, as somebody who's been in the media business and the punditry business for 30-something years, in Kerry, they think I'm anti-Kerry. Outside of Kerry, people think I'm pro-Kerry. And it's a very difficult balancing act particularly being a Kerry person, a former Kerry footballer, and talking about Kerry football, because any sort of criticism, be it constructive or not, is perceived as negative and you're letting down the county. I mean, I'm a proud GA person. I'm a proud Timpernoman. I'm also a very proud Kerry man, and I want Kerry to win every game. I want Kerry to win All Irelands. And when they don't, I'm as disappointed and as angry as the next. And I make no bones about it over the years. If they fail, I'm critical of their failure. And like, with all due respects, I mean, this is a Kerry team who over the last couple of years have left winning of big matches behind them. They left 2023 Dublin, the match against Dublin. Gavin White has turned over, and the game turns in Dublin's favour. And you talk about last year, Shane Ryan dropping the ball. So mentally, like, criticism of Kerry from a Kerry person, once it's fair, and I think I like to be fair. I read some of the other stuff, and these boys are manoeuvring here. I'm not. I have no interest in management. I have no interest. I did 35 years coaching at schools level. The last job I did was I coached a Khmer team to win a Kerry under-21 championship, and I put myself up to be Kerry under-21 manager. Indeed, after being turned, they didn't give me an interview. But then I rang the manager and I said, look, I'd love to help out in any way I could. And the manager listened to me for an hour, and he said, Pat, he says, yeah, I want you on board, because I said, you know all about the under-21 scene. I know who the good players are and whatever like that. So I want you on board. I'll ring you back tomorrow. That was about 10 years ago. He hasn't rang since. So let's put it clear. I like to be balanced and fair in my criticism of Kerry, but I have offered to manage Kerry teams, and they haven't even bothered me. But like, just briefly mentioning that mental thing, what Dick is, and there's no doubt about it. As Paddy said, it takes a grain of rice to tip the scales. It takes a grain of rice. It's a game of inches. And mentally, like, I saw people slagging David Clifford for suggesting, for asking the Kerry people to turn out.
That was within our own parish, even.
And I thought, this is bollocks, because this was bollocks. The commentary on David, anything that will give you an edge is vital. And so what if David Clifford wanted extra Kerry support? An extra Kerry support, a crowd behind you, gives you that inch, is that grain of rice. And last Sunday was the first time, it was the biggest ever crowd for a quarter-final for many, many years. The crowd got behind Kerry. They had huge support. And there's no doubt about it. It helped. And then you talk mentally, and you look at the Ulster teams and their success in All Irelands with Mickey Hart and with Jimmy McGuinness and with Kieran McGeeney. And you talk about mental, and there's one striking similarity with all those great teams and with all those great managers. They have never put All Ireland titles back to back. And I know what it's like, because it's very difficult to put All Ireland titles back to back. You start back in January for a new season, and you know what's ahead of you, the commitment, the time, the effort, the whole shebang. And sometimes that monkey in your head is saying, well, fuck it, there's only a medal at the end of the day. And you'll drive yourself to anything to get that one All-Ireland medal. When you have that All-Ireland medal in your pocket and you've spent a couple of months of everyone clapping you on the back and saying, great, when you get back the following year and there's a drop of 1% or 0.5% in commitment, in an effort, it shows in a team's performance. And I just felt the hunger, the commitment, the intensity that was there last year in Armagh was most definitely not there last Sunday. And the bottom line is, outside of mentally, look, the bottom line is, these new rules suit Kerry footballers. They suit their style of play, they suit their kicking game, and it affords space to their star players to display their wide range of skills. So,
Dick, we'll just take in Armagh in this point. Is it, and I know you kind of laughed about it a few weeks ago, but is it any coincidence that the three teams from the group of death in inverted commas are all out of the championship now? Was there some sort of method to they had to not kill each other to get those points on board, but they probably expended a hell of a lot more energy maybe than the other teams. Like Armagh looked gassed for that 15-20 minutes the other day, and I know they finished relatively strong, but they were kind of like, in horsey terms, they were going on and off the bridle at different times, and they were completely off the bridle for that 15-20 minutes in the middle of the second half. They came back on it towards the end, but it was too late. They had a couple of goal chances. Is there anything in that Dublin, Galway, Armagh are all out because of their exertions at the group stages?
I don't think so. I think you could be reaching a wee bit for that. There might be, because, look, I suppose to counter that, look at Donegal. All right, we'll come to them in a minute, maybe, but they arguably in terms of maybe physical tiredness had the most excuse or reason to be sort of, you know, bit leggy and waning towards the end, whereas arguably they were the fittest team, strong at finishing at the weekend. I think the worst type of or tiredness you get is mental tiredness, and I've been there, and I just remember certain games when the thing's going against you and the breaking ball's going against you, it feels like someone's just throwing a bag of cement in your back. And you just can't get it off. And, you know, it's nothing to do with, you know, cardio or muscle strength or muscle memory. It's just a mental fatigue. And I'd say just for those 10, 15 minutes, the Armagh players just got mentally exhausted because they were chasing shadows. Every energy they were putting in on the pitch was, as Pat said, was chasing a Kerry jersey because they couldn't get the ball. There's nothing more tiring in football than chasing without the ball. You know, the yards that you run tracking back and tracking men as distinct from the yards run the ball feel twice as heavy, and that's just ultimately what beat Armagh. And we can overanalyze things if we want, but it was boiled down to 10, 15 minutes, and not even the 15 minutes. It was maybe the 5 minutes. Like every team will get a bit of a run. Good teams, Kerry were always going to get a bit of a run, but it's the fact that it went on so long. And if they had have even stemmed it to give it like 5 or 6 points, but the fact that it got out to 8 or 9, it just felt that game got away from them. So I don't think so. I just think they just probably were shell shocked, and mentally then they were just sort of exhausted. And you know, other teams will have different reasons for that. But so to your point, was it the exertions over? I don't think so. That would be my own thinking on it, Mike.
Okay, lads, we've spoken a lot. Now, to be fair, I think we're actually some of the few that have given Meath the credit they deserved long before last Sunday. But Jesus, like everything was put to them. They conceded 2-3 in the space of a couple of minutes. It looked like Galway were going to kick on, Pat, and I thought I loved watching Meath in that second half the last day. I loved the adventure. I loved how carefree they were. I loved the fact that a ball drops around Jordan Morris's feet and he takes on a shot that Leo Messi probably wouldn't take on. Do you know what I mean? I just loved their adventure the other day, and they got their just rewards. They probably should have won that game by 4 or 5 realistically, Pat, I would have said.
Look, I was blessed to have been a player under Mick O'Dwyer as a manager. And I think I've said it a million times before, but the greatest quality Mick had was he could fill you and your teammates with belief. Belief that you were the greatest player in your position, belief that you were the greatest team, belief that you couldn't be beaten. And I've said it 100 times, in Mick O'Dwyer's pre-match speeches, we never spoke about the opposition. We never spoke about the opposition's star players and how we could counteract them. It was all always belief in our own ability, belief in our teammates' ability. And Jesus, we went out thinking we'd win every game. We were 10 foot tall. And you go back to Jim McGuinness when he took over in Donegal, a similar team there. He had those 4 words: commit, focus, believe, achieve. Commit, focus, believe, achieve. You get fellas to commit, you get fellas to focus, you get fellas to believe. And that's the key word. And everything I hear out of Meath players last weekend, from coming out of, as Robbie Brennan, from Robbie Brennan as a manager, that word belief. He fills us with belief. Most of these guys were part of the hammerings from Dublin and Kerry last year.
That's what makes it all the more remarkable, Pat, isn't it?
But he makes them believe. You think about it. He appointed a captain and a vice captain. Captain is Owen Frayne. He's 22 years of age. The vice captain is Kieran Caulfield, who's been one of the players of the year. He's 21 years of age.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes, like I remember that in 75, there's something about the beauty and the innocence of youth that you don't fear. You'd only see 15 players, just this same builders. So last week was a masterclass, but it was a masterclass in 18 believing, 2 their character. Like I said, they were beaten by 16 points last year by Dublin, 15 points by Kerry, and they come along and beat them this year. And then you start to say, they were going well last week, and then next minute, in the space of a few minutes, Galway hit them for 2-3. Galway were a goal ahead, and you said, that's it. But this is where character and belief comes in. The heads never dropped. They're reorganised. Again, it goes back to the Kerry template. That middle third, that battle around the middle third, that not so much winning in primary possession, but winning that dirty ball, winning those breaking balls. Kerry did it. Meath did it. They brought on Conor Gray, and he was a wrecking ball. And it wasn't that he caught many balls. He was getting a fist in. There was always a breaking ball, and to every breaking ball, there was a Meath player. There was a Meath player down in it.
Just on your point there, Pat, he had played, like, I'm talking like, I think less than 20 minutes of championship or something like that coming into that. Brennan obviously makes lads believe, because he came in and turned a massive game with little or no game time under his belt.
But that belief, you take Jordan Morris, who's a classy forward. I mean, he was injured in the last game of the league. It was a season-ending injury. I think it was both knee, and did he break a bone as well? And he's back starting last Sunday. But you take his performance, and this is about belief. The first 5 balls, I think, he kicked 3 of them wide, and he was turned over for 2. But belief. You keep going. The head never dropped. He kept going. And what happened, Jordan Morris? He ended up scoring 1 goal and 6 points and becoming man of the match. And probably his most vital thing was his interception, his tackle on Johnny McGrath that led to the goal. So, well done, Meath. Well done. Character, belief. And sorry, final thing. I mean, every county around Ireland, every county player around Ireland, every county manager around Ireland, even every county board can look around and say, geez, we have footballers as good as Meath. We could do a Meath on it. So if there's a good message coming out of Meath's wonderful run, is that belief can carry you anywhere.
Dick, just on that, and from a Galway point of view, do you think this is the end of the road for Pádraic Joyce? And do you think he's got enough out of what would look like a fairly golden generation in Galway?
He didn't get enough out of them because there was an All-Ireland there for them. That's not to say that All-Ireland's gone from them, whether it's Pádraic Joyce or another manager to come in and trying to bring something different and freshen up remains to be seen. I think Pádraic has done enough for that to be his decision. But I was desperately disappointed in them. I've liked Galway. They're a team that I've sort of warmed over the last number of years, but they're becoming almost like Mayo now in the sense that they endlessly let you down and frustrate you. And the weekend was another example of that. Like, I know from again, being a Monaghan player and a Monaghan supporter, you go into a lot of games against big teams as underdogs, and you're having to sort of, try and find a way to bring them down. And the one thing you want when you're playing against a team that's sort of been rated or predicted, that they step off, that they don't come at you to try and finish you in the first 10, 15 minutes of the first half. And you go back and watch that Galway first half performance, and it was awful in terms of the lack of pace, the lack of urgency. They just stepped off and slowed far too much ball around the middle. There was one time I actually shouted at the screen. There was Peter Cook got a ball, and they were in a very strong attacking position, and he actually stopped. He turned, he soloed backwards, facing the canal end, and done a 360. And I'm just sort of saying to me, I'd nearly just take him off to try and shake things, because I could see the Galway weren't at the pace of the game mentally. And it was giving me the opportunity to stay in the... They weren't playing great. It was a very poor first half, let's be honest with you. It was a very average standard. But by Galway being so poor, it kept Meath in the game, to the fact that belief... Because in the same way as I said about Kerry and Tyrone, like, Meath have plenty of tradition there that they can believe when they go to Croke Park. Like many of Meath teams before them against the head turned up, so they don't lack belief, because they'll have been in their own clubs and their own houses in the days leading up to it. They'll have been reminded of that, so they drew on that. But a very passive Galway allowed them to do that. And even when, Galway went ahead, and they did, and I thought Galway were going to kick on, they still weren't convincing me that they were up at the pace of the game. Now, it did take me to fight back, and huge credit to them, but they're playing with a freedom. Again, and they're playing with no pressure, no stress. Now, that's flipped. All right, they're going into an All-Ireland semi-final, and their strong men are going to be marked, and, Jordan Morris is not going to have a tougher evening than he's going to have in 2 weeks' time. But they'll worry about that then. But I was just I'd say Pádraic Joyce is absolutely sickened with that performance, and going back again. And listen, we have to be, as Pat says, our job as pundits or analysts, whatever we want to call ourselves, we have to call it as we see it and not personalise it. But the reality was, Shane Walsh would have to be very disappointed that, that was a game, and we talked about him. He had found something. There was something that he found in Breffni Park, and he carried it on into the down game. but again, flattered to deceive, and sort of the whole Galway attack sort of melted a wee bit around it. Again, Comer coming in, made an impact for 10 minutes, but why couldn't you do that for 70 minutes? So I think if Pádraic Joyce is coming back, Mike, he's going to have a real rethink about the team that he's building for an All-Ireland, because that's a couple of times now they've gone up to Croke Park at that stage, and the players that he's going with just haven't been reliable enough. So he's going to have to find something a wee bit different, maybe a bit more pace and energy around the middle. It's all well and good having big, strong, heavy-built men, but like you've seen with Donegal and you've seen with the teams that are winning at the weekend, you need pace. You need that sort of, what was it Gerry Brennan talked about, repeat sprintability. Galway didn't look to have that when it came to the metal, and they'll be desperately disappointed, because there was unquestionably an All-Ireland in that team, but they're just 5% off it at the minute, and they'll have to bring something more to the table if it's Pádraic Joyce, whoever, next year.
Do you want to come in there, Pat?
Oh, geez. Actually, Dick made a very good comparison, Mayo. And you look at Galway over the last 3 years, and they've done a Mayo on it, on big matches, the big days, particularly All-Ireland, 2 All-Ireland finals, on the big days, with the winning of the game, they collapsed. They had the winning of the game against Kerry, no doubt about it. Last year against Armagh, they were the better team. But 2 things about it. One, in the second half, they couldn't. Their shooting efficiency left them down. But actually, a similar thing as the first half, and Dick alluded to it. I've written down lateral attacks, lots of first half, ponderous, slow. And if you can remember the infamous opening of last year's All-Ireland final, I think was it a 2.5 or 3 minute spell of possession by Galway before they took off. Before Paul Conroy got off a shot. So you had the same thing again this year. You've had the same failings. The top players on the big day. This is the key. On the big day, you need your top players to perform. We had in Kerry the top players perform last week. You cannot say that about Galway. For the umpteenth time in a big game, a final, in this case a quarter final, the Shane Walshes and them disappeared. And we talk about this word a lot, this phrasing a lot, hammering the hammer. And Kerry hammered the hammer, that middle third of Armagh. They put the Armagh half-forward line retreating, and they stopped McQuillan and Jarly Oak attacking. And Meath, no different. They hammered the hammer, that big, athletic, powerful Galway middle eight. They matched them, they flooded the defence, and they curtailed them. And once that happened, Galway were in trouble. But you're right, Joyce owes nothing to Galway. He's been a brilliant servant, but they're a team that have left a lot of big matches behind them, and I'm not sure, but they could be the Mayo of this era.
Dick, just speaking about leaving things behind, your own county were in a phenomenal position at half time, 115-11 up. Beggan gets that 2-pointer with the last play of the first half. Monaghan have a spring in their step going in at half time. Donegal definitely don't have any spring in them by the looks of things. They have a 6-day turnaround, they have a hectic schedule, and Donegal produced a really good second half, but Monaghan definitely shot themselves in the foot as well. Some poor shot choice. They scored 5 points in the second half. One of those was a 2-pointer by David Garland at the very end. They went 23 minutes without a score. This is a big missed opportunity from your own county.
It was. Listen, I spoke about it last week that it was such a huge opportunity going in. I genuinely believe that, and I backed them on the basis that I felt that they were as good and are as good as Donegal on their day, and that first half showed that. Now, they weren't a 7-point better team in the first half. Let's call a spade a spade. They got a few, worldly 2-pointers, no more than Rory Beggins, but they were playing well. I watched it back last night and this morning, on repeat, and they played really well in the first half. They turned Donegal over, which is very unlike Donegal. They put real pressure. I'd say Patton has never experienced a first half like it in terms of the stats, and that was just really good play. Like I talked about, Monaghan team, going to Croke Park and playing in a manner that Croke Park demands. It's off the front foot, it's positive, it's have a proper cut at it, and Monaghan done that in the first half, and they got their just rewards. Now, whether it was that Donegal lifted it, but at the same time, Monaghan wilted. Like, you have to be honest with that. Like, there's very few Monaghan players could look at that second half and analyse it and say that they played their best.
Stephen O'Hanlon aside, nearly, you know what I mean?
O'Hanlon, he did. He had a few good, but in a lot of ways that they were just that, by comparison to Meath, by comparison to Kerry, and by comparison to Tyrone. In those clutch moments around the D, they were just that half a yard off their Donegal marker opposite that was giving them the space to run around, and there was far too many of those Donegal's scoring efficiency was through the roof, but a lot of that was to do with that Monaghan were just too passive. They just didn't get close enough in the second half. And any team that's allowed sort of free shots on goal, like O'Donnell sort of raced through at one stage and kicked one from the 21, like that shouldn't be happening at that level. And that was just maybe, again, it was very similar to the Armagh game. The game just got away from them. They were scrambling, they were chasing possession, they couldn't get their hands on the ball, and they were, as I was saying, all their running was running after Donegal players, which is mentally exhausting. And by the time they got sort of settled, they found themselves 4 or 5 points behind and time nearly up, and the game just got away from them. Like, at the end of the day, they were 7 points up, Mike. Yeah. Like, they were 7 points up, even in new money. That's still a considerable lead. Like, there was enough. Now, they lost Ryan McInnesby just after half time and Conor McCarthy for the last quarter. They were huge losses. Like, we're not making excuses, but like Donegal are benefiting from the fact that all the good players are coming back fit and fresher, and they have a strong panel. Whereas on the flip side, Monaghan lost 2 of their most important players and 2 of their best players in the championship, and so crucial for Croke Park in terms of hard running, pace, linking other players. And it's no coincidence that Monaghan wilted in that sort of that sort of middle 10-15 minutes when those 2 players are out, because the subs, like Jack came on, but Jack's a completely different player to Ryan. You needed that hard running up and down the pitch, and Conor McCarthy as well. So I felt very sorry for them. I felt that they're just sort of their luck sort of deserted them. Even Rory Beggan hitting that 2-pointer hit the post. Yeah, you know, these wee things, and it dropped to Andrew Woods and he got nothing of it. I just sort of felt their luck dried up, and then just Donegal hit a bit. But like, Donegal were hugely impressive. Like, there's no question about that. Like, you can't take away from this the quality of their performance. Like, if you just look at their second half, the pace at which they move at, and the amount of runners. So it's not just a man on the ball. You look everywhere, there's men running all over the place that just had Monaghan at 6s and 7s. Like, Donegal are without question the best conditioned team left out there in terms of their size. Even their big men can cover ground at pace. But it's the way they're coached. Watch them how they defend the D as well by comparison to other teams. They actually push out on the kicker. They were pushing out, just putting them on players, especially in the second half.
They were happy for Yeat. They were happy for Yeat to take the 2 pointers. It was kind of similar to 14 semi-final. They knew it wasn't going to last forever. Do you know what I mean?
The way they were, they pushed out. They didn't in the second half. If you look in the second half, they were pushing out. They were actually pushing out that wee extra 5 yards outside the arc. They weren't giving Monaghan that extra half a yard to get the shot away, because they knew that was probably the only way that Monaghan were going to win the game, because that's the reason that they were 7 points behind from 2 points. So I'm sure it was a tactic to say, listen, lad, they're not getting 2 point shots away. That's obviously a Monaghan. So we got to, as Pat says, hammer the hammer. So they nullified Monaghan's 2 point threat in the second half. But they were superb. Like, they all just raised their game, and like, Jim McGuinness can rightly now be very happy with where that team is at. They've done a huge body of work. They're the form team. There's a team to beat. There's no question about it. They've got 2 weeks, and it's going to take. And they've got the easier side. I know they've got huge credit, but I think that mental psychology that they've been benefiting from is going to flip. And I think, either a Tyrone or a Kerry have to win 2 big games. Donegal might only have to win 1, and I think they're the team to beat for me.
Pat, from a Donegal point of view, like, they got some hop even off the bench as well. Darrow O'Wheel, like McBrearty had his hands on everything. I remember him even coming out of a ball in defence 30 yards back from his own goal, which is not something you see. He was scoring himself, he was setting up scores. The 2 O'Donnells were absolutely flying. Jason McGee made a big impact. Like, there was no question of their character coming into this game, but like, what a test of, or what a flying past of colours test for Donegal.
We're back to that word character again, and you look at it, that character, they're 7 points down at half time. They're supposedly the 6-day turnaround is going to come against them. They look flat and tired in the first half, so you say, this is Monaghan's best chance. But like, the second half, just briefly on Monaghan, I mean, the stats were 5 points scored, 13-point turnaround, 23 minutes no score, 12 wides, 2 into the goalie's hands. What happened, Monaghan? They ran out of steam and they ran out of ideas. That's mental and physical exhaustion. Physical exhaustion, the conditioning of Donegal, as Dick alluded to, is unreal. It is absolutely unreal. Monaghan wasn't able to match that conditioning, that running of Donegal. And the second thing is not just physical exhaustion, but when you get mentally exhausted, mental exhaustion means your shot execution, your decision making breaks down. And it all broke down. There was a systems collapse by Monaghan in the second half through mental and physical tiredness. And looking at Donegal, that second half performance was powerful. And certainly their conditioning, their fitness, their running, their shooting efficiency was something like 126 from 36 shots. They got in the second half, their work rate, their tackling, their turnovers. 111 out of their 115 scored in the second half came from turnovers. 9 different scorers. The pace, the pressing, they were just, in that second half, they were awesome. And I would agree with Dick, probably have the easier of the 2 semi-finals. They would be fancied to beat Meath and probably in pole position at the moment, narrowly over possibly Kerry.
Dick, time is against us, but that was a big win for Tyrone against the Dubs as well. Obviously, Con was only able to come onto the pitch heavily strapped in his calf. Was fairness to him, when nobody else wanted to take on a shot, he took the bull by the horns and took shots. He scored 1. He probably maybe missed 2 that I can remember. This definitely wasn't the greatest game, but from a Tyrone point of view, it was just a matter of getting through. And it's a nice scalp to have. Like, they've beaten Donegal now this year, they've beaten Dublin, and now they're coming into a semi-final, obviously against Kerry.
Yeah, I suppose it was the one prediction I got right last week.
1.5 you claimed to me, because Monaghan led at half time.
It was that the way. Sorry, I was cut the straws. But yeah, and again, I've been sort of waiting on Tyrone all year, because at the very start of the year I sort of saw them as a team.
Oh, we really bigged them up after the first round of the league now. We really bigged them up.
Just with the player profile, the new rules with Malachy and all of those factors are sort of lumping together, and they're starting now to as man says, come to their milk. Now, they just got Dublin at the right time. You know, I sort of I'd said last week I knew O'Callaghan wasn't going to be fit, and that played out as we thought in terms of a major impact or, you know, negative factor towards Dublin. And, you know, Tyrone done enough. Like, it was probably the poorest standard in many ways of the games over the weekend, and Tyrone just had more off the bench and had good clinical finishers that Dublin ultimately didn't have. You know, listening to Dessie Farrell and, you know, the lack of 2-pointers, and that's just the thing that Dublin have sort of resigned themselves to not having this year. It's come back to ultimately bite them, but that's them to go away. That the rules are the rules now, and if you're not kicking at least 2 or 3 pointers in the game, you're severely handicapped. So again, it was probably inevitable Dublin were going to go out at some stage. There wasn't, you know, an All-Ireland probably in that team in terms of the amount of games we're going to have to win at this level. Is there in Tyrone? I'm not sure either. I think they're but I'd never write off Tyrone when it gets to this stage of the championship. I think they're as good as Kerry. I think there'll be nothing in that game. I'm going to go to it after the 2 semi-finals. Going to bring the boys down to that, because I think the Tailteann Cup's on on before it as well. So it'll be a cracker. And it's funny though, like, you know,
take some water there, Dick. Take some water.
It's funny, yeah, I'll big up Tyrone now. I won't be bigging up Tyrone, don't worry. It's funny that, you know, Tyrone are like Kerry now. Like there was a very poor Tyrone support down the road. The Tyrone haven't been turning out for their county team for the last 5 or 6 years, whatever's happened to them. Now they'll turn out again, especially now that it's Kerry, to sort of get their mouth salivating. So that's going to be a massive game. Now, big challenge for Malachy O'Rourke. Okay, Malachy O'Rourke, when he was with Monaghan, ultimately didn't deliver on big days, ironically, against Tyrone when we got to that stage in the competition. And he'll not get there's the honeymoon period that he got with Monaghan. There'll be Tyrone supporters now expecting them to go down and beat Kerry. And Malachy will be expected to deliver a performance now. But he's there, and he's got the team where he wants them, and he's getting, you know, a bounce off the bench. Young McElhone, I'd say he's going to be a special player. Watch him, and I say he could have a big bear in that game. And there's a few like him coming behind them. So a very intriguing game. It's all going to be about Clifford and O'Shea, but I think there's a few of the new Tyrone breed nipping at their heels, and don't be afraid if there's a new chapter in the Tyrone over Kerry saga.
Last word to you, Pat. Dessie Farrell obviously stepped aside after 6 seasons in charge, 2 All-Irelands. Obviously spent like years involved with underage teams, under 21 All-Irelands, etc. Played until he could no longer play anymore. He stepped aside after probably at least 3 decades of service between playing and managing and coaching. Who do you think could be the next man in?
Yeah, I was just worried there for Dick. I thought the heat is getting to him, that his mental faculties are starting to break down. He's wandering a little bit. But just a simple one on Dublin and Tyrone. 2-pointers. Tyrone kicked 2-pointers. Dublin got no 2-pointer. That was the difference in the game. Yeah, two things. Yeah. Dessie Farrell, what a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful servant to Dublin football, both as a player, both as a coach. He coached these lads, brought a lot of these lads from under 14 up to win All-Ireland medals. An absolute brilliant player, an absolute brilliant manager, a brilliant servant to Dublin. The Louth County Board will be saying, oh, Jesus, no, it's going to happen again. Our top manager is going to be poached, and they're going to, they lost Mickey Hart. Obviously, Robbie Brennan is in pole position. An amazing man. He knows nothing to Dublin football. While we're on managers, and we didn't talk about it because it only came last week. What a horrible classless decision by the Mayo County Board. The way they treated Kevin McStay. It was just so wrong. A brilliant servant, just like Dessie, a brilliant servant of Mayo County Board, and that was the way he was treated. He didn't deserve that. And finally, a word of warning. The big mantra in Kerry when you as a footballer, and just a word of warning to Donegal, to Meath, to Kerry, and to Tyrone. The one thing in Kerry, you're always told you're only as good as your last game.
Yeah, that's great stuff, lads. Again, there's so much to talk about there. It's interesting to see who the next man is in Mayo. Pat mentioned Eamon Fitzmaurice, who obviously had a big hand in the new rules. Would Jim Gavin ever return to the Dublin hot seat? Who knows? They have all the insight into the game, the wonderful game that we're all been treated to now. But wouldn't that be interesting if you had Fitzmaurice, if you had O'Rourke, if you had Jim Gavin back in the game? It's going to be an interesting off season.
Michael,
I just hope, Mike. I hope this week's a better week for the Sunday game, Old Guard, because between Pat Brawley, poor Kevin McStay, even poor Colin O'Rourke, looking how Meath are performing after them. It's been a tough week for them, so keep the head up, Pat. You have an All-Ireland semi-final to look forward to.
It hasn't been a tough week for me. Anytime Kerry win a match and beat the All-Ireland champions is a very, very good week. It's a very good week. Can I just say, look, this is a first. No rant against the GA, no rant against the split season, no rant against RT Plus. And isn't it brilliant? Yet again, we're happy, we're positive, we're exhilarated after another brilliant weekend in the football championship. So well done to the GA, to Jarlath Burns, to Jim Gavin, to Eamon Fitzmaurice, all the FRC for making us fall back in love with that great game of Gaelic football.
There's a small bit too much positivity there now, because I thought it was, and we've spoken about this before, the Saturday with no live game on terrestrial television is an absolute joke, and how we could not have one game on live TV on Saturday and at least one and possibly two on Sunday is an absolute joke. But that's
we were nearly there. We were nearly there. Jack should give you a scolding every week, Pat. You're that positive this week.
You're positive.
Great stuff, man.
Send on the video to Jack.
Great stuff. We'll talk next week, lads. Thanks a million.